Good afternoon. How many of you know who I am and are willing to admit it? Please raise your hand. How many of you don't care who I am, but this better be good? It's Friday afternoon. Please raise your hand. If you're in the same session that I'm in, how many of you have noticed I'm talking pretty fast? Raise your hand. The reason I do that, the International Reading Association tells me you could process over 100 bits of information every minute if you'd get with it, so you need to suck it up and do your part. I intend to do mine, all right? McCrell, the Mid-Continent Research Education Laboratory out of Denver, Colorado, would share one of the best things that you can do about management or an anticipatory set is to let people know the anticipatory set. Turn to your neighbor and tell them whether or not your kids have ever come into class and said, what are we going to do today? What are we going to do today? What are we going to do today? That ever happened to you? Give me a big yes.
Yes.
McCrell says, number one in class management, always the first thing, if it's on your whiteboard, if you're lucky enough to have that, if it's on your flip sheet, whatever, kids have to know the anticipatory set. You teach them where it is, you teach them to look at that, and they only get 3 days of you say, well, that's a very interesting question, and oh, gifted and talented person, I know that you know where that's posted. You know, just steal their thunder, and they're going, well, okay. So, if you're in the same session that I'm in, you have had a week of stuff. True or false? Now, all that stuff is nothing without you. So today is this session right now is going to be about you. And what do you do with that stuff? If you're not living in a peak performance body, some of this stuff may not go anywhere. People say define a peak performance body. I, like Missy, gave you her definition of physical literacy this morning. I'm going to share with you my definition of a peak performance body. It's one that gets up every morning, runs to the morning mirror and hollers, you sexy thing, don't you ever die. And then I look in the mirror and I remind myself why. Because there's too much work and fun to be done. What are the kinds of things that we do to sustain our energy? Some of you are less than 2 weeks out before you go back to all that busy, happy, good stuff. But it's like I've got 4,212 things to do before that. And you don't understand. I got life going on over here and Grandpa and Grandma, and I've got a boomerang kid who is 32 and just cannot get their poop in a group. But I love them dearly, you know. And so we got stuff going on. So how is it that we sustain and continue to gain energy? Because as a profession, we're at a critical crossroads. Shake your head and say, I knew that. And right here is a core. You got to be like an amoeba. You got to start figuring this out. Don't go away until you get your way. There's a powerful story. How many of you know about the cookie girl? The story about the cookie girl. Marquita Andrews, a gazillion years ago, in the 1980s about then, TWA, Trans World Airlines, was still in business. And Girl Scout Cookies formed a partnership with TWA and said, for the person who sells the most Girl Scout cookies in this little 3-week period, you win a trip for 2 around the world. Well, Marquita Andrews in New York City said, you know, that's always been my dream, to take my mama on a trip around the world. She set a goal. She said, I'm going to win that trip. You see, without a goal, any old road will do. So she went out and she started selling Girl Scout cookies. Anyone, turn to your neighbor, make a guess as to how many boxes of Girl Scout cookies you think she sold in 3 weeks. You figured out she won the trip, or I wouldn't be telling the story. Turn to your neighbor. Just give them a guesstimate. In excess of 25,000 boxes of Girl Scout cookies. In excess of 25,000 boxes of Girl Scout cookies. I'm going to give you the 3 points from that. If you don't take another thing away from this institute, this is a powerful message. You started early with Judy talking about advocacy. And we can advocate and activate and all that stuff, but if we don't walk the talk, if people don't understand that you eat, live, breathe, and believe this stuff. Guy on the airplane said, well, you're pretty adamant about that. Do you think? Hello, here's your sign. The 3 points that Marquita said when they made a 13-minute video, because you are in the business of sales and marketing. Marketing is getting the right product to the right people at the right time for the right price. If for no other reason, I love meaningful movement and brain development. We've got a new program called GOTV where you can do this kind of stuff. So when you have those rainy day things, you can make sure what's going on in your classroom. You can make sure that your teachers are helping you with stuff. You've been helping with reading, writing, math, science, all that stuff forever. But she said 3 things that are powerful about sales and marketing. They poked a microphone under her nose and said, "To what do you attribute your success?" In her little old 10, almost 11-year-old way, she said, "Oh, mister, it's so easy." She said, "Number 1, you got to have a product you believe in." She said, "Number 2, you got to ask for the order. And number 3, if they tell you no, it's not their fault. It's your fault. You didn't connect them enough with purpose, passion, mission for them to understand why this is so important. Number 1, you got to have a product you believe in. Number 2, you got to ask for the order. Number 3, if you get a no, it's your fault." She said, "You go back, my terminology from the 4th grader, you get your poop in a group, you figure out how to connect them with your message with such compassion that they can't tell you no. Number 1, you got to have a product you believe in. Number 2, you got to ask for the order. Number 3, if they tell you no, it's not their fault. It's your fault. Don't go away until you get your way." How many of you were marching on Washington in 1970 and 71 with me and Billie Jean King and some others for a thing we called Title IX? How many of you have been thrown out of really good places? Raise your hand. Yeah. So the logic is we didn't go away until we got our way. It took a very long time, and we still, 35 years later, have issues that we have to revisit about parity and equity. Welcome to the real world. We're going to talk about energy. We're going to figure out what it is that might be some missing ingredients so that we take this phenomenal week and really do something with it. If you're in the same session that I'm in, how many of you care how many initials I have behind my name, connoting that I gave the University of Nebraska $13,471 for the right for my husband to call me Doctor or Your Highness? How many of you care about that? No, and I am blessed to have fellow status in the American School Health Association, the North American Society. But in addition to your certificate that you got here, when you order your business cards from vistaprint.com, 500 cards for $10 or whatever, I'd like you to add another set of initials. I am in my 45th year in this profession, and I can't tell you how much I've learned by wandering around. Turn to your neighbor and go, "I'm going to do that, LBWA." Because this week has been about more learning by wandering around. It's based on the research. It's from some of the best in our profession. And we all need you all now to take up the sword. So here, if you're in the same session that I'm in, if you need anything from the GeoMotion group, thanks to them for sponsoring me here. A big old thanks and a validation to Artie and all of his crew for putting the time, the energy, and the resources into something like this. Let's give him a standing O. Standing O. Standing O. And turn to your neighbor and give them a big O. Because without you, all of this is nothing. All right, here's what we need to do. If you're in the same session that I'm in, let's remember how we got here. Glasser, the father of learning, says you can see it, you can say it, you can hear it, you can read it, but it's not until you start discussing this stuff that we're about 70% of the way on the learning curve. There is not a better curriculum content area in all of education than for us to be able to have our kids to talk about the skill they just did, the assessment they just took, the social behavior, the management or whatever. That's us. I think Glasser was talking about us when he talked about how we learn. Talked about the fact that, I've got to get you to experience it, and then we're 80% of the way. Here's what we're up against. About half of us aren't living in a peak performance body. Turn to your neighbor and say, oh, now she's gone from preaching to scolding. Just share that to your neighbor. Our kids have to know what a physically educated person acts like, looks like, behaves. What's our health literacy? What's our physical? Do we walk the talk? Glasser tells us, got to get them to experience it. Everybody says it's got to be fun. Turn to your neighbor and tell them the number of professional preparation hours that were categorized in your entire undergraduate, master's, and beyond that were just fun. Fun 101, fun 202, fun at the 400 level, and then fun at the graduate level. Be sure and share that with, yeah. So you know, this fun thing is really cool. But some of you are looking at me like I'm smoking a bad batch the way I present, okay? But this is fun for me, and some of you are going, if she would just stand still. If she would talk slower with that accent that is north of the Mason-Dixon line. But this is kind of, so all this business about fun is pretty cool stuff, but fun is different for a variety of folks. So how about if we just go back to some basics? I'm not an unfun person, but how do we go back to the basics? This is good for you. How many of you in this room have ever had a root canal? Give me a fist pump and holler, that's me.
That's me.
How many of you were like, oh, I am so excited about this root canal. I'm going to call every day, every hour to see if I can just get in earlier and have it done. I'm so yippee-skippy about it. Everybody's talked about how fun a root canal is. Raise your hand if that was you. When you were done, were you better? Hopefully it worked. Yes. It just was good for you. And I am tired of defending my profession and why it needs to be in the critical core day and why I need to have enough time, enough accessibility, and enough stuff to do what I'm prepared to do. We are a nation at risk because of our health and well-being, and we just need to start righting the inactivity epidemic. And the obesity epidemic is an outcome. The inactivity epidemic I can do something about. Give me those kids, hold me accountable, look at my assessment, look at my curriculum, and if you give that stuff to me, I will make a difference in those kids. Turn to your neighbor and say, that vein in her neck's sticking out. She must feel strongly about that. Glasser tells us when we teach it to someone else, those of you that don't have 4 years at secondary, I know that you've got those kids in an internship in their sophomore, junior, senior year, back down with the little ones. And in school systems where I see that happening, called servant leader. There are about 32 states, I think it is, has character education mandates. And in their secondary years, they have to do something in the community. This is powerful stuff. When our kids get it, when what Missy talked about this morning, they got it, that's the sophomore year, the junior year, and Phi-Ed is no longer required. But they take it and give it away. If you've been in the same session that I've been in, it's about reflection. Here's what I'd like you to do. Stand if you're able, reflect about day one, and what is the biggest aha out of all the stuff that you went to on day one that you're going to do something with when you get back. Stand if you're able, reflection about day one, partner A and B, check for understanding. 3, 2, 1, talk to your neighbor. Clap twice if you can hear me. We got to move. Who's willing to share what they, yes, from day one? Excellent. Pass that up to her. She teaches physical literacy, not physical education. Thank you ever so much. How many of you had to look at your program as a refresher about the stuff from day one? Not scolding, but just a point. The same thing happens to your kids. Because they got other stuff going on. Y'all have had other stuff going on since you've been here. Kids then go on to another subject area, and we fill their neurons and activate their dendrites and try to get stuff over the hippocampus to the cerebellum. All that's happening. So we can't look at them like, seriously? You were just here. I had you 6 days ago, especially at the elementary level. So I want you to think about that, and we need to take a chill pill because it happens to all of us. No matter how great we think our instruction is and the stuff we gave them, stuff happens in between. So that's why we do the refreshers, the retooling. If you've been in the same session that I've been in, 3 resources that I read a lot within our profession. I'm a member of every professional organization lifetime, so I get any amount of magazines that you can imagine. But I read that I call in-house. I read out-house. My new favorite is The Energy Bus by John Gordon. And yes, some of you have read it. And I'm going to give you an example of The Energy Bus. Do I have any women's collegiate softball fans in here? Give me a fist pump and holler, that's me. How many of you watched my Huskers at the College World Series play 15 innings over 6 hours? Energy, commitment, involvement. Here's what Coach Rhonda Revelle did. She's in the Softball Hall of Fame at the national level. She had her kids. She had her family members. Now, granted, her team is 16. She had her staff. They read The Energy Bus. And we're going to talk about the components of the Energy Bus that were transformed every day to practice at game, when you're in your faith base, when you're in your personal life. What are some key components of the Energy Bus? Those of you that get to serve on your employee wellness committees, the Women and Infant Children Act, WIC of 2004, almost 10 years ago, reauthorization said you all need to have wellness plans, employee wellness. There's absolutely no excuse for us not having a healthy, active, high-energy, fit faculty staff, every employee of your workplace. There's a great book called Well-Being, The 5 Essential Elements by Rath and Harder, and it's based on the research from the Gallup organization. Shake your head and I say, I know about them. It's in Lincoln, Nebraska. Shake your head and go, whoa. Their national headquarters are now outside Omaha. But it was founded by Dr. Don Clifton, who founded Selection Research Institute. You now know it as the Gallup organization. They have worldwide stuff. But they really looked at the 5 essential elements of well-being. Powerful stuff if you're doing staff development. How many of you are on your school wellness committees? Give me a fist pump and holler, that's me. That's me. If you don't do another thing, I need every one of you to go back and ask. Number 1, do we have a wellness committee for this entity where I work? And number 2, if I'm not on it, here's my card. Put me on, let me know when the next meeting is. Who knows more about this stuff than we do, true or false? And without you at the table, they're liable to do something really dumb. So get to the table. Turn to your neighbor and go, okay, there's our first of marching orders. I think she's given us 3 already. Say that to your neighbor. And if you have not yet, I know you have if you're a technology person, and probably Joey has read, if you have not yet read Generation IY by Tim Elmore, this will let you know why it's here. Technology is here, and it's not going to go away. Shake your head and say, I knew that. Turn to your neighbor and say, now I can show up every day with my cranky pants on, or I can figure out how to embrace this, how to incorporate it, because it's here. Say that to your neighbor. There have been a number of sessions here where even I went, aha. If you're in the same session that I'm in, based on what you have learned from a number of presenters, and Jean, it's time to move. I'd like you to stand if you're able. I'm going to start the music, and you have 35 seconds to get everything in motion but your bowels. Let me see, freelance. Turn to your neighbor and say, we just changed the energy in this room. Throughout the conference, you have been reminded that the area of the brain that talks about motor control is also that area of the brain that has more than half of the neurons. You need to go back. If you could only get 15 minutes in one message, it has to be, I got stuff. I got stuff for you. You're worried about those academic outcomes. You're worried about that behavior management stuff. Kids being poopy people, acting up and acting out. I got stuff. Now you got to give me the time. Got to give me the resources. Got to have the space. You're going to have to find another place for the reading fair. But I got stuff. And trust me, I will have data to support that stuff. You have been here all week about accountability and assessment. When I was NASPE president, we were coming out with new assessment stuff. And at the national convention, I would watch people walk up and, games and 101 things to do with a paper towel thing, kind of thing. And then the assessment stuff would be right there. And I have video of people going out. Seriously, I do. Out. And then back over here to another, and I'm not being demeaning about that, but another thing. I videoed it from the other way. I thought maybe it was the direction. And it was like, that is your saving grace. You can be the best dadgum teacher on the continent with the yippiest, skippiest curriculum and stuff. But if people do not know what you do and how you validate it, you are going to be on the chopping block. And if they're not talking about you now, you're already in trouble. Turn to your neighbor and go, OMG. I couldn't tell you. I was state director, was one of the first times I met Artie. I'd known of him. He's 2 years younger than me. But when we were state directors together, I would call him and I'd go, you cannot believe how many calls I get in a month that say, will you come to our school board meeting? They're considering cutting back or cutting physical education. And I go, and this is the first you've heard of it? Yes. Oh, how much do they know about your program? Well, I don't know. Well, it's obviously nothing. You need to be your best advocate. You need to pump your chest up, pretend like you are Arnold Schwarzenegger or Dolly Parton, and you need to be in their face about your space. If they're not talking about you now, you're already in trouble because it is so easy to eliminate you if you're not on anyone's radar. Shake your head and say, I knew that. Here's your third challenge. Covey tells us habits of highly effective people. Within 48 hours from when your alarm goes off Monday, if you have not made an appointment with someone to share with them about this phenomenal week, shame on you. Turn to your neighbor and say, oh, she's scolding us again. You have a prime time. There are so many public health reports that have just come out. It's on everyone's mind about how do we ramp up reading and how do we ramp up math. Well, you know what? I want to ramp up the health status of our kids too. And there's a profound correlation coefficient between that. Shake your head and say, I knew that. So you need to make an appointment. I don't care if it's with an administrator. You'll probably get in trouble if you talk to a school board member without somebody knowing about it. But when was the last time you made an appointment with the Lions, Tigers, or Bears? Those service organizations, that's what I call them. The optimists, the Rotarians, the professional businesswomen. Those people all have children and stuff. And you find one of those groups and you just give them a short elevator speech about why physical activity education. I'm trying to change the name of our profession. I educate people about physical activity. That's what I get to do. Turn to your neighbor and say, she's smoking a bad batch. How many of you believe that? No, you're all on the same train. But we got to figure out, people now are all concerned about academics. So right now, I'm going to link my horse to the academic world, because that's it. Sequencing, the big buzzword. You sequence every nanosecond that you step out of your office. You need to share with your faculty. Oh yeah, I got sequencing stuff. I'm all over that. We'll connect with the meaningful movement in the brain development, but we'll also talk about the health status of kids, because we got stuff. We got behavioral management stuff. You got to give me kids to do that. If you're in the same session that I'm in, quickly, turn around, swivel in your seat, adjust your underwear, and tell your neighbor something so profound from day 2. Quickly do that. Quickly, quickly. Hear me. Who's got it? Yes.
Connections with people within my profession that will help me build up my passion when it starts to get
Excellent. She's tweeting. Excellent. Who else is willing to share?
When I'm doing something, I better have a purpose of why I'm doing it. I'm not going to do it just because it's fun. There's got to be a purpose behind it.
Excellent. Excellent. I'm a big person about success, so let's look at redefining success if we're on the energy bus for this profession. The first S in success is about sincere dedication. Freedom is the right to be able to choose the line of greatest advantage instead of the path of least resistance. We got to figure out that you are the driver. You're the driver of your energy, you're the driver of your program, and you better decide. So if you're in the same session that I'm in, just look in the mirror every morning and go, you sexy thing, don't you ever die. There's stuff to do today. Got to validate ourselves. The U in success stands for unique. This is such a unique time in our profession. We know more about getting well, staying well, being well than we've ever known. We've got white papers, we've got books, we've got technology. It's time, folks, and it has to come from us. If we're waiting for the International Truck Drivers Association to show up in our defense, it might be kind of a long wait. True or false? Not dissing truck driver, but they got their stuff too. When are we going to take charge of our profession and not go away until we get our way? It starts with a sense of community like this. And yes, you may work with a poopy person. You just keep trying to pick them up, and eventually they may get it or they may go away. But do not let them drag you down. Some of you work with people who have retired and they still have 23 years left on their contract. I understand that. I understand that, but it is what it is. My saying is this: it is what it is and whatever it takes. It is what it is and whatever it takes. And if it is to be, it's up to me. We can do all this other stuff, but I'm going to do what I get to do. So I want you to start with optimism. That's why you get up in the morning and you run to that morning mirror. I mean, I don't listen to the news. I don't pick up the newspaper. I read my Bible verses, and then I go for my workout. Because I don't want to know what house was on fire and who got raped and who got shot and that Snowden's Russia's got him and they're going to give him a job. I don't know. I do not want to start my day that way. I want to start my day with knowing that if I live in this peak performance body to the best of my ability and take all the stuff that I've been privileged to get over 45 years, that I can make a skosh of a difference. I'm going to start, and I'm going to fuel my own ride. You ever had anyone poke a hole in your bucket? But that's why you get up every morning. Dr. Don Clifton talked about putting 2 dips of the power of positive attitude in your own bucket in case a jerk pokes a hole in. You still got a reservoir, and you're going to go, well, thank you. That's kind of interesting how you did that. You have a healthy, active day. And then you walk off and go, serious. But at least you didn't go, oh, man. When are we going to take charge? If you've been in the same session that I've been in, about day 3. Quickly tell your neighbor something about day 3. Who's got day 3? Who's got it? Yes, right there. Gene Blades. Who's to improve? It's time to move on to the first C in success. You can put your seat back in our seat. Let's talk about commitment. This is one of my biggest issues over my years, the difference between involvement and commitment. How many of you think you know the true difference between those two? Raise your hand. I'm going to give it to you in Nebraska terms. If you had bacon and eggs for breakfast this morning, the chicken was involved, but the pig was committed. That takes a real long time in New Jersey, trust me. How want you to invite people on your bus. Start with a group of people who eat, live, breathe, and believe like you do. And it may not be in that circle of influence in your community. It might have to start with someone from here who you keep one another propped up. Invite people that they act, they eat, live, breathe, and believe. They define, they act like you do. We call those champions. You heard day one about how do you build champions for your program, because you cannot do this alone. And if they're not talking about all the good stuff you do, then you just show up and defend your job. They never see it as the programmatic stuff that you do for kids. They see it as you're defending your job. What a wonderful job we get to do. If you're in the same session that I'm in, about communication. I did a staff development in Gillette, Wyoming, for all the transportation providers. So I got two 20-year-olds, and they jump up and they holler, "You can't tell me what to wear." And I finally went over and I said, "Jim, I think they're talking about underwear, and you're talking about footwear." Because you see, if you're as old as I am, your flip-flops were thongs 45 years ago. Now they're called flip-flops. And underwear are called thongs. And he looked at me and he goes, "Really?" I said, "Yes." And he goes, "Is that wedgie thing?" "Yeah." So he had kind of an idea. But and so we almost end up in a fussing match because they're talking adamantly about what they're talking about and what they know, and so is he. And if we're going to bring people into our circle of influence, we got to make sure in the world of communication that we've got to check for understanding before we go too much further. I found this on a billboard outside Waverly, Iowa. The guy is a veterinarian and a taxidermist. And either way, you get your dog back. Now, I know I'm a dog lover too, and some of you are having a visceral reaction, but the cool thing about this is there is absolutely no misunderstanding in this written word. None. So this is on my computer. It's on anything that I do. Before I send a text, I do the veterinarian taxidermist test. Does it say exactly what I want delivered on the other end? And I think we would serve ourselves better if we slowed down enough to make sure that we've got it there before we instant gratification send it off. If you've been in the same session that I've been in, it's a quick turn for day 4. Who's got it? Talk to me.
John Thompson.
John Thompson, and what did he talk about? Tricks of the trade. Would you pass that back up to her? Yes. Excellent. You know that our national organization AFERD has teamed up with the President's Council. Let's move active schools now. We now have one test, it appears kind of thing. So what are we going to do to figure out how to get people to understand who we are and what we do? If you've been in the same session that I've been in, your words are powerful. As I wind down, I want to share with you that all of you in this room could tell me at least 1 or 2 teacher stories. My 2nd grade teacher is Mrs. Richards. I did not like school. I could think of every reason to get kicked out of school because we did not have elementary PE, and I lived on a ranch. And there's lots of fun physical activity things to do on a ranch. So, like, I would poke Jerry Teetreek in the back of the neck with a lead pencil. Turn to your neighbor and tell him whether or not you think you get to stay in school if you do that. Now, I got kicked out of kindergarten, I need to tell you that. So I'm in 2nd grade, because the 1st grade teacher we're getting her out of here. Got Mrs. Richards. Day 3, she came up beside me. She pulled her desk up beside my desk. She's sitting facing this way. I'm right here, and she looked at me and she said, "Joanne Owens, you're really smart." Boom, snapped me up. "No, Mrs. Richards, I'm not very smart." Yeah, you are. You're smart like a fox. You don't want to be in school, do you? No, we don't do anything fun here. She said, yeah, yes we do. And she said, I'm going to tell you what. You can go and do and be anything you want to go and do and be. But you got to stop swearing. I said, well, what the hell do you mean, Mrs. Richards? She said, you can't use those words. And I said, oh, shit. So she worked with me. And other than when I tell this story, I don't have to use those kinds of words. Because if I would have become the Secretary of Education, I would have had you all loop with these kids. You're one of the few that gets to see these kids year after year after year. What a profound difference it makes. So I would have looped you, first and second grade teachers with those kids. Third and fourth grade teachers would have moved on. Because Mrs. Richards went to the principal and said, I've got K6, I'm going to move with this group. Because Joanne Owens and Jerry Teachick really need me, you know, kind of thing. So she moved with us to third grade. And she got me to quit saying shit, damn, and hell to express myself. And then she said, I think we're okay. You go, you'll be fine. And then she went back and she picked up another little second grader that also knew shit, damn, and hell, and his name was Dickie Owens, my little brother. And she got him to quit using those words, and he went on to be a phenomenal systems electrician with Burlington Northern Railroad and is just retired. And then I got to my high school years, speech. I would make every kid take speech. Mr. Farrell said to me, Joanne Owens, you have a gift to gab and you're a great storyteller. And if you can figure out some subject matter that you love so much, and if you stay focused, because you're going to have opportunities to do other things, but you stay with that your entire career, you may not get any awards, you may not get any rewards, but I guarantee you it will make a difference. Mr. Farrell was my speech teacher. He says you go with passion and purpose, and that's what Gordon tells us in the energy bus. Every day, go with passion and purpose. If you're in the same session that I'm in, I want you to have high energy. I want you to have expectations. You've got to have an anticipatory set. I want you to do this with excitement. There is not a better field in the whole world to be teaching in than ours. True or false? So we got to get excited. Enjoy the ride every day. Laugh, learn, share, have fun. And the last couple of lessons stand for stress management. I'm going to tell you, some stuff hasn't worked. So if your horse is dead, dismount. Do not go to a workshop about how to get a bigger stick, how to get a bigger whip, how to ride a dead horse, what the neighboring counties are doing. But no, just get off and refocus and re-energize and do what was your mission, your passion, your purpose. Turn to your neighbor and tell them whether or not you've ever ridden a dead horse longer than you needed to, just yes or no. Women, you need to know we're better at this than men because it's the principle of the thing. We're all about principle with our hand on our hip and elevating our voices and shaking our head. Ladies, shake your head and go, yeah, been there, done that. All right. And the last test is about if it is to be, it is up to me. It's about energy, folks. It's about regaining, retaining, sustaining, and you better do it every day with purpose, passion, and mission. I'm going to give you some tools, and these are Joanne Owens-Nauslar info bites. In the world of health enhancement, I believe that you need to avoid housework. I believe it to be the leading cause of cancer and heart disease. I'm going to give you a correlation coefficient. That handsome cowboy gentleman that I showed you in the beginning, he and I had a prenuptial agreement. 2 parts. Number 1, if you want long hair, cowboy, grow it, because this is as good as it gets, all right? And number 2, if you want the house to be respectable enough that anyone can come by any time, you'll either clean it or make enough money to have a housekeeper. I am not going near that stuff. I do white fences and a clean barn and leafy spurge, none of that. But I don't do housework. He does. In our 32 years together, he's had 3 myocardial infarcts. He's a 2-time cancer survivor. That's a correlation coefficient. Don't go. I got nothing going on here, right? I want you to think about your feet and your happy feet, and we got to get people to figure out how to move to improve. If you've been in the same session that I'm in, I want you to practice the dipper in the bucket theory. I want you to get up every day with purpose, passion, and mission. Fill that bucket with you sexy thing, don't you ever die. Have you ever ask anyone how they are and they told you. And you're going, oh, seriously, I hope they don't see my new car in the parking lot, you know. Human resources, refer them, those other kinds of things, but don't spend a lot of time around poopy people, because I guarantee you, gossip and rumor will tear you down and you won't have the energy that you need for the munchkins. As I leave you, it's time for me to share with you that we got to move, we got to laugh, we got to get our act together with this profession. We got to look ahead, but still reach back. You are so privileged to have had the Arties and the Georges and some of those folks here, but there are a lot of newbies too. So we got to look ahead and we got to reach back. I want you to aspire every day to inspire, and I want you to practice this business of busy, happy, good, and fun. If you've been in the same session that I've been in, I'm going to share with you and leave with you what inspires me. I did a student council presentation a gazillion years ago, and a kid from North Dakota saw me there, and he said, Dr. Joe, will you come? I do outrageous health community makeovers. He said, will you come? And I said, yeah. And so I had done the Kiawanans, I had talked to teachers, I had talked to parent groups, I had talked to the Power, Money, and Influence, and I said, I always want to get in with kids because that's my inspiration. That's why I do what I do. So I got these 8th grade kids, and they're in the gymnasium, cafetorium, you know, kind of thing, and I'm talking about risk and rewards, and you can go and do and be anything you want to go and do and be, but you're not entitled to anything. And the more you are living in that peak performance body, stuff may happen, but you'll be better. So I'm there, and the kid comes out, and he's got the little obligatory gift, you know, kind of thing. He says, Dr. Joe, thank you so much. And I got a standing O from these 8th grade kids, you know. And he said, every time you talk to the big people that get to decide this stuff, you tell them this. So it doesn't matter what my audience is, I leave this with them because they're watching us. He said, if all this stuff about movement was so important, how come you all don't live in a peak performance body? How come all the men aren't between 14 and 17% body fat and all the women aren't between 17 and 22? How come? He said, if I'm supposed to fasten my safety restraint every time, how come? How come you all don't do it? If I'm not supposed to use alcohol in excess, how come some of you do? How come? He goes, and when you start acting like we're supposed to act, we'll get it. But we don't see a whole lot of that now. We see about half of the big people not acting like the stuff that you're teaching us. So this can't be very important. We don't have these messages all the time. We don't get to do them every day. And if it were important, we'd have it every day. It's just something we think that you just stick in the middle of the curriculum. Because it can't be important. Reading must be important. We have that every day. Social studies must be important. We have that every day. Math must be important. We have that every day. But what you all do must be that important because we don't have it every day. And then over half of America doesn't have the message. He goes, when you get it, we'll get it. And he handed me this poem. I'm going to leave you with it. It's called I'd Rather See a Sermon by Edgar Guest. I'd rather see a sermon than hear one any day. I'd rather one should walk with me than merely show the way. The eye is a better pupil and more willing than the ear. Fine counsel is confusing, but example is always clear. I soon can learn to do it if you'll let me see it done. I can see your hands in action, but your tongue too fast may run. And the lectures you deliver may be very fine and true, but I'd rather get a lesson by observing what you do. For I may misunderstand you and the high advice you give, but there's no misunderstanding how you act and how you live. If you've been in the same session that I've been in, it's day 5. What's your next move? I'm hoping that your next move is something you come here. Your pages might be pretty blank unless you're a 2-timer at this institute. Your kids, more than half of your kids may be the same way. Their pages may be blank about who you are, what you're delivering, why would I do this? Early on, it needs to become very black and white as to why they're doing what you're asking them to do And if you do that, your programs and your outcomes will be absolutely living color. Thank you ever so much for letting me invade your space. Have a healthy and happy.